Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams. Happy Friday to you. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Some fun stuff on the show today. We're going to try to really finish on a really high note today. Of course, it's Jeff Sintel on the road with him via AAA later on. A lot of recruiting stuff to get to with Jeff. We'll have a little bit of a taste of Jeff's conversation with five-star offensive lineman Marius Mims in today's show. Huge compliment to Georgia fans from former UGA assistant, now turned Arkansas head coach Sam Pittman. We'll tell you why this is relevant also in the program today there as well. And before we're done, I've been trying to get to this all week long. I guess you sort of like at the end of the day on a Friday, the best chance to get to it. Some very interesting words about Jordan Davis that I think changes the scenario for Davis in a big way potentially this upcoming season. Really, this is the kind of thing we should probably spend even more time on the show talking about, but we'll do it before we're done today. Very, very interesting look at what Davis might provide for the Dogs this season. Let's try to do all of that. We'll keep it moving fast on a Friday. Good to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We begin today's show very much in the same spot where we started yesterday's show. Still waiting for the SEC schedule. I'll give a shout out to the folks at Saturday on South who kind of, did a play off this with the I like the movie Anchorman, Will Ferrell, the Panda Watch and Anchorman. This is a little bit like Schedule Watch Day 5. It certainly feels like we've been there for a while, and that's certainly a clever way to kind of describe all of this. We are waiting to find out who Georgia's additional two opponents are going to be, and we're also waiting to find out the dates for all these games. And we said this last night, Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau, that ultimately the win of the schedule may be more important than the who, because the who is just two additional teams. The win could be very different than it was initially planned to be, at least on the basis of the Big Ten schedule that came out a few days ago, maybe possibly foreshadowing on all of that. There has been all kinds of speculation about who Georgia might be playing, why it is there's such a holdup on this. Let me deal with at least one aspect of that speculation in kind of a fun way for right now. You want to go back, gosh, this seems like forever ago now because of how fast the news cycle spins, but go back, what was it, a couple weeks ago, something like that, when we first found out that the SEC was going to play the 10-game conference schedule. It was thought, and I believe it was Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated who just flat out kind of insinuated this in a report, that the next 2 years' worth of rotational opponents might be what's added for the SEC. Picking up Mississippi State, picking up Arkansas. That was initially thought to be the two teams that Georgia might pick up. Since then, there has been all kinds of talk about, no, it's not going to be that. More on that, by the way, coming up in just a moment. But there had been some chatter that it might be the other Bulldogs from Starkville, the Arkansas Razorbacks, the team that Georgia's slated to play in 2021. Now, what was fun about this is that Arkansas coach Sam Pittman, of course you know him as the former UGA offensive line coach, he met with reporters this week, and it was asked, hey, there had been some chatter, there had been some rumblings, there had been some talk that maybe you might, instead of making your debut as a head coach against Georgia in 2021, that you might do that in 2020. Now, in talking about all of this, Sam Pittman tossed a pretty strong compliment the way of Georgia fans. If you are a UGA fan, my guess is you probably are. Otherwise, what are you doing even listening to this? Although we do have some non-Georgia fans who listen, and we love them there as well. The point is, though, Georgia fans will like what Pittman said about them. Here he is with Arkansas reporters.
Depends on where we played them. If we went to Georgia, it'd be nice to go back and see all the people there, and they have an incredible fan base. If they came here, if they're allowed, they're going to travel in. I'm going to be telling the Arkansas fans to sell that thing out, because if not, it'll be loaded with Georgia fans, But, I have fond memories of Georgia. They were good to me, the entire state, and, of course, Kirby Smart. And if we played them a year earlier than what I thought, then we'd look forward to playing them.
So I think it's really, really cool that the reputation that UGA fans have earned going back to 2017 with the first, DawgNation invasion to South Bend, completely taking over Notre Dame Stadium, continuing last season with the trip to Nashville, huge numbers of Georgia fans for every away game. The Tennessee game last season kind of also comes to mind for that. Sam Pittman saying to these Arkansas fans, hey, if these Georgia fans are allowed to, they're going to be taking over the stadium, so y'all better go out and buy your tickets. Now, the unfortunate part of this, and the part of this we're going to kind of just sort of ignore and leave in the corner for a moment, is because of the coronavirus, Georgia fans aren't going to be taking over anybody's stadium this upcoming season, it would probably seem. But it is really kind of cool to hear Sam Pittman still remembering it about UGA fans. He looked up in Nashville. He saw the way that Georgia fans had completely just painted the entire place red, and of course downtown Nashville and everything else there as well. So Pittman still remembers that, and he would be sort of conveying that message to Arkansas fans. I think that's really fun, even if logistically speaking that's impossible, given the fact that the predominant color in most stadiums this fall is going to be aluminum silver, as in the empty seats that are going to be unfortunately not filled by anyone, at least on the base of that right now. But kind of cool to hear him say that. Also nice to hear Pittman, who, sometimes when these, guys leave and they go somewhere else, there is a little bit of bad blood, maybe a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Pittman legitimately does not have that for Georgia, and there's no reason why he would. And I'm speaking as a fan here for a moment. I really wish Pittman well. I mean, I actually like a lot of what he's done since he's become Arkansas coach. I love the hire of Kendall Browse as offensive coordinator. I think the Barry Odom hire as defensive coordinator is really good. Odom's a sharp defensive mind. He knows that area around the Ozark Mountains really well, too. I just think that's all really good. Felipe Franks as a quarterback at a place like Florida, not necessarily going to get it done to the tune of what Gators fans want, but making Arkansas a more dangerous team. I think that Franks potentially does that, especially working with a sharp offensive mind like Kendall Briles. I think in the future, Pittman's going to be a really good recruiter for the Hogs, something that Chad Morris was not doing really at all. Arkansas was on the verge of having the worst recruiting class in SEC history prior to Pittman taking that job there. So I think that what Pittman's building in Arkansas is potentially pretty good, and very quietly, he may be on his way to maybe putting something together that allows him to stick around in Fayetteville there for a while. But it's also just nice to hear him say, hey, these Georgia fans, if y'all let them, they're going to take over a stadium. So pretty clear, Pittman may be out of Athens, but the Athens is not completely out of him. He apparently still has very fond memories of what went on there at UGA. Now, of course, the debate and the chatter about what might be going on with Arkansas and Georgia, who you might be adding, is just another reminder, as I said off the top of the program, that we are still waiting to find out what the 2 additional games look like in the now 10-game conference-only schedule for the SEC. And one of the things we mentioned very early in this week was some of the online chatter that there was some infighting in the conference about how all this is playing out. I gave you the tweet from Joseph Goodman from AL.com. That's a columnist that had said that he'd heard from someone that Florida's coaching staff was complaining about having to add Alabama to their schedules. And we talked about that here on the show. And for the most part, that was just kind of fodder for a conversation, whatever else. And I guess for the most part, I didn't think all that much about it. But here we are on this Friday, several days now, a couple of days removed from the ACC schedule announcement, several days removed from the Big Ten schedule announcement. And you're left to wonder, wait a second, what really is going on here? Is there some backdoor politicking that's keeping this from taking place? Are there teams like Florida who potentially, at least it was initially rumored, might be playing Alabama? Are they really preventing this from happening? How is all of this exactly going down here? And if you're a Georgia fan, you're just kind of left to wonder, what is all of this about? I mean, after all, Georgia plays Auburn every single year as its SEC West crossover game. No one complains about that because it's a traditional rival for UGA, and frankly, Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs aren't ducking anyone. It's just the luck of the draw that this is also a year in which Georgia plays Alabama. Once again, Georgia fans aren't complaining about that. They want themselves a piece of the Crimson Tide. Georgia fans, for the most part, Georgia, at least as far as we can tell publicly, is just sort of fine rolling up its sleeves and playing whoever. And yet you find out that other folks in the conference aren't necessarily all that excited about doing that necessarily. Florida, who had kind of been resting on the idea of playing a very easy schedule, at least on paper, what seemed to be a pretty easy schedule back when it was the original 12-game slate. Is the AL.com columnist right? Are they really behind the scenes trying to get a schedule to look a certain kind of way? This is all very, very interesting. And, when the initial athletic directors meeting took place at the beginning of July in terms of how the schedule change might occur, we heard lots of leaks from that meeting of who wanted what and, how is all going to go down. Ultimately, some of those initial opinions would have seemed to have changed over the course of the following weeks, but we heard a lot from that. When the 10-game schedule announcement was ultimately made, the fact that was the format the SEC was moving towards, once again, we heard a lot of leaks and kind of private behind closed door discussion. When some of that kind of stuff made its way to some of us who live our lives on the internet, we found out something, some of the stuff going on about that. Will we be also as lucky to ever find out what really is going on behind the scenes? Who is holding this up, if anyone is? Is someone trying to prevent the schedule that the league wants to give to it from coming its way? I hope some of the reporters who've been good on this subject thus far are able to find out some information about this, because it could be useful information for Georgia fans who, as the best I can tell, are just sort of fine going to battle with whoever they're scheduled against. Some of the SEC rivals maybe not quite feeling the same way. If that's true, names should be named, stories should be told, so we know who to blame. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Great to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon with our friends in the Classic City on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Always great to be able to do that. Podcast form, literally wherever you find them, Apple, Google, Spotify, worldfamousDawgNation.com, pretty much everything else. Just glad to have you with us as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger today. And, of course, big shout-out to our friends at Kroger. All kinds of really cool stuff right now. Kroger pharmacies have all your back-to-school vaccinations. Now, listen, my daughter's a kindergartner, so when you kind of go back to that school situation, there's a lot of those forms you're going to fill out, a lot of vaccinations you need to make sure that you have. Kroger's got you covered for all of those. A lot of these are for things I can't even pronounce, meningitis, things like that, TDAP. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. I'm no medical expert. I've told you that before, but I am smart enough to know this. They are not letting you in that school unless you got the piece of paper in your hand that says you're all cleared and ready to go. So if you need that, Kroger can do that for you. Do this website for me, Kroger.com/vaccinations. By the way, vaccinations has 2 C's. I'll tell you that. I can see that because it's on the screen right there in front of me. Kroger.com/vaccinations. They'll get you ready for back to school. If you're going to be there in person, you need those vaccinations, and Kroger can take you down the road on all that. Really good stuff. All right, it's going to be Jeff Sintel here coming up in just a couple of moments. We'll go on the road with him, assisted today by our friends at AAA. Part of what Jeff and I are going to talk about was a very wide-ranging interview that Jeff was able to conduct with 5-star offensive lineman Marius Mims. This has been a very unusual 2021 recruiting cycle for the Bulldogs. Some of the 5-star guys that we thought we'd be talking a lot about, we may be talking just a bit less about them than we probably thought that we would. However, one of those relationships that continues to be strong, that Georgia continues to, the best I can tell, sit in a very good position with, is with Mims. And when Jeff talked to Mims this week, the question comes up of, well, why is that? Why does Georgia continue to be in such a really good spot for Marius Mims, at least one of his top contenders? And Mims gave an answer that also kind of ties back to something else we talked about on our program a little earlier this week. Here is a Marius Mims with Jeff Sintel.
What's the biggest draw for Georgia right now?
So I'd probably say relationship, really, because like I said, Coach Lou, he's the new coach, he's just coming in, so I'll probably say that relationship with him, like as long as we keep building a relationship like we're doing now, where everything will be good. But other than that, that's really it. Playing time, it'll come as long as I play hard.
So listen, you love that attitude at the end, and that's the kind of thing that Georgia, I think, has been pretty good about bringing into the program. Guys who say, listen, I'm not going to make a demand for playing time a big part of my, investigation process as I'm choosing the school that I want to go to. If I do my part, playing time is going to take care of itself. Mims didn't say this, but he could be forgiven if he said, just look at me. I'm clearly built the way an SEC offensive lineman is built. If I go in there and do my job, then playing time is going to be no problem for me. I'm going to be set up and ready to go with that. But the idea that the relationship continues to be strong with Matt Luke, and I said this, and listen, when I brought this up earlier in the week, I said it full well knowing that some people were going to disagree with it. It wasn't necessarily meant to be the kind of thing to start an argument. It's sort of kind of a fun, I think I called it an intramural squabble among UGA fans of the current Georgia assistants, who is doing the best job for Georgia on the recruiting trail. There are a lot of assistants that over the course of the last couple of cycles have really done a very good job. However, I don't know that anyone in the last, say, into the 2020 cycle, into 2021, I don't know that anyone is currently outperforming what Matt Luke brings to the table. And yes, some of this is because of the groundwork that was laid by the voice that you heard near the beginning of our show today, the former UGA offensive line coach Sam Pittman. That's undoubtedly true. but don't discount the way in which that Luke stepped in a challenging situation. With Pittman gone, some players would view Georgia completely differently. We know that Josh Braun did. We know that a guy on the roster like Cade Mays probably also did as well. It would have been very easy for guys like Tate Ratledge or Broderick Jones or Chad Lindbergh, Cedric Von Prawn to also view Georgia much the same way. And yet, at least in the case of, Jones and Ratledge in particular, guys that we know had strong competition to go other places, Luke stepped in and won with them. He convinced them to be a part of this program. And even with the very impressive haul that Georgia put together for the class of 2020 along the offensive line, there have already been some really big wins for the class of 2021. Michael Morris, everybody likes him. Dylan Fairchild, everybody likes him. Fairchild may be one of these guys that rates much higher in the 24/7 composite by the end of the cycle than he did a couple of months ago. That is a prospect on the rise. And yet, even with all of this, still a strong spot, still a strong position with the 5-star Marius Mims. There's a lot to like about what Georgia's doing with its offensive line recruitment. And to hear Mims say Luke is a big reason why, I think only validates what a lot of UGA fans kind of already thought. So good stuff there. The best you can tell, Georgia's in a good spot with Mims. We'll find out more of that with Jeff. In fact, let's do all of that. Some rumblings of one-time Georgia recruiting target maybe set to announce. Another Georgia recruiting target has teased the possibility of doing that very soon there as well. A lot of ground to cover. Let's do it all as we go on the road with Jeff Sintel, assisted by AAA.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And we'll say hello to Jeff Sintel here on the road, assisted by AAA on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Jeff, before you join us, had a chance to hear a little bit from your interview with 5-star offensive lineman Marius Mims. Good stuff, both on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger this week in the DawgNation video channels, and some of the stuff also on the website at DawgNation.com as well in written form. Mims is a player that Georgia fans obviously have a lot of affection for. They love him as a recruit. It was interesting to hear his perspective on UGA a little bit. I played some of the audio of Mims in particular talking about Luke. What was your overall takeaway, though, from getting a chance to speak to Mims this week? Or I guess it would have been last week. All right, we'll get Jeff pulled up here and get ready.
I got to see I think 2 armadillos on the road, 1 muffler. I got to eat some Brunswick stew, Brandon, with mini like spaghetti noodles in the dish.
Wow.
But I think the thing, these are all Cochran staples, but I think the thing for me is I think of Marius, besides having a cell phone that's probably as busy as anyone on the planet right now. I think to me he really gets a sense of Georgia, staying at home and playing for Georgia. I think in one of our interviews we had on Before the Hedges on Wednesday, he understands that he's from Cochran, and that's a huge Georgia football area. I think when you drive around Cochran, I think you can play that game where I think every third car has some Georgia paraphernalia, whether it's the vanity plate or the back glass or something related to Georgia going down the road. But, for me, he really understands the intersection of name, image, likeness, and what it means going forward. This is really the first class that's going to have a keen sense of that, where, he would get local endorsement money through the local laws. He would get, he'd see more people wanting an interest in buying his jersey, that sort of thing. I don't think jersey sales are going to be a big thing here, but he gets the gist of it that, staying at home and the benefits of Georgia are going to be a very, very big check in the ledger as he figures out his pros and cons for everything.
One of the things I've talked about this week, and I also mentioned this on the heels of some of the things that Mims had to say, is I think you could make a case that Matt Luke is recruiting for Georgia right now at a clip that may be exceeding what anybody else on the current coaching staff is doing. There are a lot of Georgia coaches, assistant coaches, who are doing their job on the trail and have been now for a number of years. But when you look at the end of the 2020 cycle, holding that together in the absence of Sam Pittman, I think Luke deserves some credit for that. A deep and talented crop of offensive linemen added for the class of 2020, and yet Georgia's currently right now recruiting offensive linemen probably better than it's recruiting other position groups. You have the class of 2021. I'm not quite so sure that anyone can say they're out recruiting what Matt Luke's doing at the moment. What do you think about Luke as a recruiter thus far, stepping into some big shoes when it comes to what Sam Pittman was doing? and yet Georgia continues to stockpile these offensive linemen and be in position to add others. I think that's a testament to Luke's ability.
Yeah, Brendan, I think I saw your headline earlier this week for one of your shows about making the case for Matt Luke being perhaps the top recruiter on the staff, and I think I'll share my viewpoint on this one, and I'm gonna ask you to think about golf a little bit this weekend. I know it's going to be very, very hard for you to do with the first major happening this weekend out in California, but
Brendan Todd, by the way, playing very well thus far. Former UGA golfer who's had quite a calendar year already. Brendan Todd doing very well there at Harding Park in San Francisco.
Certainly wanted to give you the time to set up and plug that former Bulldog into your program early this morning, but I think I would look at my recruiter ratings, Brandon, a little bit differently. If you would agree with me, I bet you would. You would perhaps be guilty of short attention span theater when it comes to recruiting, and especially given the 2021 cycle that seems everything is in the now. But I would look at my individual Georgia recruiter rankings, maybe the way the world golf rankings look. And I have to go through that on maybe the last 2 years, the body of work over the last 2 years. Now, I think the really big strength for Matt Luke is the retention of guys like Tate Ratledge, Chad Lindbergh, Broderick Jones, a quick flip of an NC State commitment in Austin Blasky. Micah Morris, he was kind of a silent commitment to Georgia. We know that, even midway through the 2019 season. So I guess that's another retention. But Micah Morris, to me, was always a guy that was going to be a Georgia Bulldog if he had the chance to be one. You would say the Terrence Ferguson situation, I'm not believing what a lot of chatter is out there. I think Georgia really wanted him in their program. I think Georgia really wanted him. Maybe position fit might have been up in the air a little bit, but I do think the staff in Athens and Coach Luke wanted him to be a Bulldog. But then you've got to bring in a lot of other names, man. You got to bring in, Del McGee over those last 2 years. You got to bring in the great work that, low key. I hope everybody realizes this, that Dan Lanning continues to do some amazing work on the recruiting trail, especially for a defensive coordinator. Lanning's such a vibrant personality and a genuine person that he's the secondary or first on a lot of guys that end up choosing Georgia. Elijah Judy, for example, is one of those guys. The way he recruits, the way he keeps calling on these young men and their families, even after they're committed to Georgia, really stands out. And that's different for a coordinator to be, seen as one of the chief recruiters on a staff. You can't forget, the work that, Schumann continues to do. I'd also bring up Todd Hartley a little bit now, because Todd Hartley wanted to make sure he got one of his big three in 2019, and he got one of those guys. He had hoped to get two of those guys, and it seems Hartley, with a big-time boss move in the 2021 cycle, has all those chips in the middle of the table for Brock Bowers, while letting some other guys like Hudson Wolf, Maliki Matavo, other big tight end names in the 2021 class, drift away to other schools. I think the recruiting staff, and I think we wrote about this week, about how with the loss of a Coley, with the loss of a Pittman, with the loss of a Scott Fountain, other guys are going to need to carry more weight on the Wi-Fi recruiting trail during this pandemic. And I think Scott Cochran, and those comments that were made by Scott Cochran about Scott Cochran from a Marius Mims, certainly made an impression on me as well.
Yeah, I want to get into the Cochran stuff here in just a little bit. Before that, we're on the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sintel here. And when you look at the online chatter this week, the name that has dominated the most of this, I would say, is the five-star defensive lineman, Corey Foreman. Some of this was even contributed to by you on our forum at forum.dawgnation.com. Can we just do kind of a wide-ranging deal here? What is the latest? Is Foreman considering following in the footsteps of what Jay Garcia, the USC quarterback commit, has done, leaving the West to come to the state of Georgia to play high school football? And I guess in addition to that, where do things stand with Foreman's recruitment at the moment?
Yeah, I think that where the waters are muddy here is that I made sure, because I don't try to deal in rumor a lot, but I did get word that Foreman was planning a trip to Georgia, and whether that was scouting out an unofficial, I would call it self-guided unofficial visit to Georgia and other schools, or whether it was looking at a place to play high school football. That was the gray area to that. But you see national reporters that have covered Corey Foreman for years out in California saying that he's going to stay at home and train. And any visits that he might take would be college-related visits if he would come to the East Coast. That certainly seems plausible. But a lot of these things, Brendan, as we know, kind of take place in secret until a move is actually made. And I think, Corey Foreman, let's just share what we think makes the most sense here. Any trips he takes to Georgia, whether it's to scout out the next 3 years of his football career or the next 3 months of his football career, I think those are worth paying attention to. I think if the move was made to Georgia, that could only help Georgia if he decides to play his high school season, a final high school season in Georgia. But right now, I think there's some trepidation with a lot of recruits about, let's see the season get started or let's see the season get closer. I mean, I don't know how many of your loyal viewers saw this yesterday, but I certainly did, how the Georgia High School Association kind of canceled all the planned scrimmages that were going to take place across the state of Georgia during that 2-week delay from the original start of the Georgia 2020 high school football season. That's something to pay attention to, because that was a momentum pause in a climate where it had been all momentum going forward for Georgia high school football. He's so highly rated. I think he's a guy that would get reps immediately at any depth chart in the country. I think Corey Foreman's going to be a name to watch, especially for those that wonder how Georgia can finish with a top 2 or top 3 class in 2020. I think Corey Foreman's name might have to be on that list for Georgia to have a top 1 or top 2 class in 2021.
So quick follow-up on this. If Foreman were to take a visit to the state of Georgia, it's obviously not a UGA visit right now, but visiting the state of Georgia, is this similar to what the 4-star tight end Brock Bowers was rumored to have, or maybe even reported to have done a couple of weeks ago? Not saying that Foreman feels the same way about Georgia that Bowers might. I'm not comparing the relationships, but just the nature of the visit where you're touring Athens, you're kind of getting a feel for the community around the university. If Foreman were to visit Georgia, and I mean the state, is that kind of what this would be like?
Yeah, that's what it is. It would be one of those self-guided visits, Brandon. You hear that with a lot of guys. You hear self-guided visits, and maybe that's the possibility for a guy like Foreman, of course, but also guys like Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. You hear that about Edwards coming down out of Michigan. You hear a lot of those guys where young people are just, ready to do something. Because if for the state of California, for instance, those guys will not have football. They all those weekends will be free. Will it be the matter of, how can they get in the stadium? Do they buy a ticket? Do they have access to a ticket? Do they come in as a recruit? You keep hearing that official visits still seem very, very unlikely in the short term with the way college football is headed with attendance and getting the season started. But with Foreman, any visit he takes to check out Georgia, even if it's a self-guided visit, I think that's a good thing for Georgia. And it may just be the norm where a lot of these young people are going to have to come and do that Bowers thing where they show up in Athens. Maybe they meet with some Georgia commits. They go to a couple of spots that are, places to eat or go around campus, and then their position coach or primary and secondary recruiters hit them up on Zoom or hit them up on the phone to kind of walk them through it virtually as much as they can. I know Todd Hartley scored a lot of points with Bowers because he created like a tour book or a digital pamphlet for him to look through and things to pay attention to as they took their self-guided tours around Athens and also around the University of Georgia campus.
It is On the Road with Jeff Sintel, assisted by AAA, and that's what AAA does for a long time. They've been assisting drivers, motorists, people on the road, making the driving experience better, peace of mind. We've been AAA members in my household for a long time. It means if my wife is out driving, flat tire, something like that, I can know, even if I'm not with her, that she's going to be well taken care of. Someone's going to show up and get her tire fixed, get her back on the road. Many of you have used AAA for very much the same kind of stuff over the years. What you might not be aware of, though, is that AAA can help you in even more ways than that. For instance, if you switch your auto insurance, you can save an average of $529. It's a great deal. Switch your auto insurance with AAA, $529 on average in savings. Go to this website. You can find out more information about this. It's AAA.com. That's AAA.com. AAA.com/auto insurance. Once again, AAA.com/auto insurance. Find out how you can save big when you switch your auto insurance with AAA. All right, Jeff, Prince Collie, the 4-star linebacker, a guy that you and I have talked about before in this space, says on Twitter that he's set to make his college announcement. Something tells me this won't be UGA when he announces tomorrow.
Yeah, you look. Oh, I think it's actually coming up tonight at like 7 p.m.
Oh, excuse me.
Eastern time. And we heard this before, Brandon. It's really hard for Georgia to get in the good graces with a young man if he hasn't had a chance to visit. A lot of the online chatter now points to, well, those are simply the crystal balls are pointing to Notre Dame and a strong connection that school has made there. And I think Notre Dame just wants to get an athlete like Prince Collie onto their defense. Maybe they're not worried about whether he's 6 feet or 6'1" or 6'2". I think Collie's decision and where it puts things moving forward basically puts a lot of priority and a lot of emphasis now on Smile Munden Jr., as if there could be any more for Mr. Munden out of Paulding County, but also Xavier Story Jr. out of IMG Academy. Those look like the inside linebacker target to really focus on for Georgia in 2021 with the decision made earlier this year by Barrett Carter and then Rod Dilworth as well. But I think as the Jared Wilson situation showed us earlier this week, man, Wilson was a North Carolina guy. He had a dual live commitment ceremony with Rod Dilworth. Those guys were both going to North Carolina. And it seems that, nothing is ever going to be terra firma right now in this 2021 class. And man, I still think we're going to see a lot of Flip City around November, December, January with a lot of these upper echelon prospects.
Well, just to kind of drill back down on something you mentioned a moment ago, I guess that was going to be my next question. I like Collie as a player. I think that, potentially could have been an interesting fit for Georgia's 2021 class. This is not, as a way of disparaging him, but him going elsewhere, should that be viewed as good news when it comes to Xavier Story, who everybody likes, and Smile Munden, who's probably the player that we may have talked about the most thus far in the 2021 cycle? Does Collie potentially going to South Bend suggest good things for Story or Munden when it comes to UGA?
I think it just suggests two things. First, a lot of folks in this state, a lot of folks across the country, a lot of folks on this program right now look onto their walls and they see that diploma hanging from the University of Georgia, and that is a mighty good thing. But also Collie has always struck me as a young man that really values education, his future, the 40-year plan, and you can't knock the Notre Dame degree, and especially the Notre Dame alumni network when it comes to something like that. I think it also shows to basically touch the heart of your question there is that I think it shows with Story and even Munden that those are the clear priorities for Georgia. You'd heard some things about, was Collie actually 6'1"? Was he closer to 5'11"? And, the size thing for Georgia linebackers have always, it is what it is. Georgia recruits a different athlete for his defense, and you see a kid like Munden, 6'3", 225, easy. Same thing for Story, about 6'3.5", 6'4", a guy that could legitimately play out on the edge as well, given his athleticism. I think those guys right now, especially sight unseen, those just seem to be the priorities now at the inside linebacker spot for Georgia.
All right, a couple minutes left here as we're on the road with Jeff Sintel, assisted by AAA. 4-star tight end Brock Bowers, not too long ago on social media, seemed to hint that an announcement was coming from him, and yet it hasn't happened as of yet. There's also been some online chatter about the Washington Huskies in all of this, which I guess I'm not really quite sure if I'm taking that seriously or not. Either way, just a quick update on Bowers, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so Bowers, I would expect the decision to drop in the month of August. That seems like it's certainly a conservative estimate. Again, he doesn't have a season as of yet. He's in California, doesn't have the ability to play college football, play high school football, this fall. He's always said he wanted to get his decision done before the start of his senior year. When you bring up Washington, I hope folks will look at the commitment boards for Washington in 2021. You'll see that while all of this is always subject to change, they have two guys that seem like they will be tight ends in that offense going forward, already committed in the class already. Of course, a case could be made that Bowers could be anything in the right offense. He could be a wide receiver, be an H-back, he could be a utility athlete as well, and certainly to a greater degree than some of those guys that the Washington Huskies already have committed there. I think the I think the thing with Bowers is, it's going to be, we put something up in our Hedges program this week that I hope everybody got to see on Wednesday night, where and we'll have another embedded version of the show going up on DawgNation.com today for those that don't have Facebook or YouTube. But Bowers is a guy that his decision time frame seems it's going to drop in the month of August, and I think that's what a lot of people have been asking me or maybe wanting to see about, kind of like what's going on. Bowers is a guy that's going to drop in August. Kamari Lassiter, the 3-star cornerback out of Tuscaloosa, who grew up in the state of Georgia, he's expected to make his decision August, September. I think Tyrion Ingram Dawkins has set and established 3 or 4 commitment, soon, going to be soon time frames already in his recruitment. Shamar Turner wanted to have his decision. That's the talented defensive tackle, defensive end out of Texas. Another name you hear about when take one of those self-guided visits as well. Those 4 names right there, Bowers, Lassiter, Ingram, Dawkins, Turner, those are the guys that we've heard or we've talked to or we've seen that, their time frame is, who could be the next to commit to Georgia in 2021? What are all those guys' time frames? How are those intersecting? Those are a lot of the names. Of course, Marius Mims will come in October. There's a lot of TBAs or anything could happen. I would put a guy like Donovan Edwards in that category as well. You hear a name like Tim Keenan, the talented nose tackle, a true zero technique, kind of like Robert Cooper. We used to talk about a lot on our program a couple of cycles ago, Brandon. Yeah. I remember Tim Keenan telling me that and Georgia certainly needs more nose tackles in the future, considering Jordan Davis's likely exodus to the NFL after a strong 2020 season. That's a guy that from Birmingham, and he's always kind of told me he wanted to wait as long as possible before he makes his decision because it's going to be that hard. I think those are the names. You hear a lot of Nyland Green. Nyland told me he wanted to make his decision by the middle of his senior season. I think those are the names that, just to put on periphery of who should I think about, who's coming down the track soon, who could potentially come down the track soon. I think those are the kind of the guys with some immediacy to their decision regarding the Georgia 2021 class. And first and foremost would be Bowers, who I think would be a special athlete in Athens. If he did choose Georgia, you're talking about 6'4", about 235, vertical leap of 40 inches, can run the 40 on a laser in low 4.5. I don't think Georgia has an athlete quite like that in its offense right now, and that would certainly be one of those big boxes under the tree for Todd Monken and his 2021 offense if Bowers became a Bulldog.
At the risk of keeping you too long, Jeff, let me squeeze this in at the end. You mentioned earlier what Marius Mims said this week about Scott Cochran. That is a new face for Georgia in the recruiting trail. I think that Cochran has a chance to be a lot more than just a stolen name from Alabama. I think he has a chance to really be a very good coach, maybe even somewhere beyond the University of Georgia one day. What kind of impact is Mims already seeing from a guy like Cochran in the recruiting trail as Cochran makes a name for himself now as something beyond just a strength and conditioning coordinator, but an actual on-field coach? How's that process going, at least through the eyes of Mims thus far?
Yeah, I think Cochran has a dominating and impressionable personality. I think the thing that from hearing from a bunch of recruits that hear from Scott Cochran a lot is they've been intrigued and maybe surprised by how funny he is, Brandon. He's a guy that's going to have recruits laughing and rolling even after they've talked to each other for the umpteenth time this month on a Zoom or on a FaceTime or whatever. I think Cochran has that dominant, vibrant personality that he's the type of guy you'd want to play around a golf with. You'd want to enjoy an evening libation with, if that's your thing. I mean, Cochran is a guy, and let's face it, I wrote about this week, Brandon. The loss of Coley, the loss of Fountain, the loss of Pittman, that's a large chunk out of Georgia's recruiting might that went in other directions for professional opportunities off the 2019 staff. And, man, Cochran's going to have to take up a whole lot of load on that, including Matt Luke as well. Those two guys are going to have to be pillars for Georgia going forward, with a lot of primary relationships and a lot of secondary relationships. And it hasn't happened yet, Brandon, but the thought of Scott Cochran walking around weight rooms or walking around practice fields or walking around stadiums in the state of Alabama, in Tennessee, and Louisiana for Georgia football and for the program going forward is going to be a very good thing for Georgia once that happens.
Good stuff, Jeff. Thanks for being here as we go on the road with you, presented by AAA. Really appreciate that. Hope you get ready for a great weekend on the road or wherever you find yourself, and we'll look forward to speaking to you back here on our program again very soon as well.
Yeah, Brandon, we'll be on the road this weekend a lot too. Got some camps, got some visits to make, and good to know that a company like AAA will be able to take care of us when we do stuff like that too.
Great stuff, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really good stuff from Jeff Sintel. By the way, speaking of good stuff, let me also mention this as well, that we announced our Inside the Huddle event. It was the original event Tuesday, August the 11th, sold out almost immediately. I was really impressed by how quickly that sold out. A chance to have kind of a casual conversation, the type of thing that normally in a normal year in DawgNation we do in person, yet this year that's just very difficult to do. So we wanted to make this available through video teleconferencing, and yet you can't have a gazillion people in something like that because the interaction that you want to have is just sort of too hard to do. It's just too catch as catch can when you have too many people in there. So we said we're going to make this very limited, and obviously it was so limited that it sold out almost immediately, and yet we were also able to add a second date. So it's the second date that I want to tell you about right now, and this is going to be the last one. It's Wednesday, August the 12th. That's this upcoming Wednesday, August the 12th. The cost is just $10 to be a part of this very fun conversation about what the voluntary workouts have been like for Georgia, moving into those coaching observed walkthroughs, the back dealings that have led to the SEC's 10-game schedule. When that's eventually announced, Mike Griffith's going to be a part of it. I'm going to be a part of it. He and I together with you. One thing that Mike and I have in common is we love the face-to-face interactions that we're able to have with UGA fans, his readers, my listeners and viewers. This is as close as we can do to that right now through the magic of video teleconference. So we're going to do that with you. For those of you who are lucky enough to get your tickets to be a part of it, it's DawgNation.com for more details. That's DawgNation.com, of course. Find out about how, by popular demand, the second edition of Inside the Huddle, the final edition, you can get your tickets before they are gone on that. That is going to be really good stuff. All right, big news from yesterday was the release of the preseason coaches poll. Georgia comes in at number 4 on this list. Let me take a look at the full top 10 here for a moment because I think the grouping around this is pretty interesting. When you look at the 3 teams rated ahead of Georgia, it's Alabama at 3. Bama, of course, beaten Georgia twice in the Kirby Smart era. Tough to make a strong argument for Georgia to be preseason ahead of the Crimson Tide right now. Georgia gets a chance to prove its point on the field against Alabama. You can't ask for more than that. Clemson and Ohio State appear to be loaded. In case of Clemson, not a very difficult schedule once again. They do play number 10 Notre Dame, but that's about it. Number 24, I guess, Virginia Tech there as well. Ohio State obviously seems to have just about everything you'd want there as well. These are by far and away the 2 national championship favorites, so at least in terms of preseason projections, not a surprise to see Clemson and Ohio State rated ahead of Georgia. But when you look at the teams that are behind Georgia, it's number 5 LSU as a for instance. Oklahoma up there at number 6. Penn State, which just lost Micah Parsons. Florida at 8. Oregon at 9. Notre Dame, as I said, at 10. I think Oregon's a really interesting team. Obviously, Joe Moorhead, much the same way that Todd Monken's trying to transform the Georgia offense. I think Moorhead's trying to do the same thing for Oregon. We've said this before. It's really interesting how similar the Oregon and Georgia profiles have been in recent years. But when you look at these teams behind Georgia, I don't think you see an obvious team knocking on the door to maybe put a lot of pressure on Georgia in those polls right now. If anything, the defending national champion LSU, I could see them slide. Florida, let's find out what kind of schedule the Gators play before we find out the likelihood of them remaining in the top 10. But the coaches poll was interesting when it came out. As far as the SEC teams in particular, let's highlight them. A total of 6 did appear in the coaches poll. Of course, Bama, Georgia, LSU, we mentioned Florida also in the top 10. But keep your eye on Auburn and Texas A&M at 11 and 13. I really think if you look at the 2 SEC teams ranked that weren't in the top 10, I'll take Auburn and Texas A&M collectively probably over maybe Florida and LSU. Listen, I'm not saying that, Florida's going to completely fall apart. I projected that to happen a year ago. It didn't quite happen. Got to give the Gators a little bit of credit for that. But Auburn still has more on defense than you realize. I'm expecting a big season from Big Cat Bryant there on the defensive line. And they go, and Popo had a pretty good year. You have to look at him doing more here in 2020. A guy like Smoke Monday still in that secondary. I think this is probably still a pretty good Auburn defense, and I've told you before I'm relatively high on Texas A&M. Certainly in comparison to LSU, the defending national champion, I think those Tigers have just lost too much. Other news from around kind of the SEC, we'll squeeze this in as a part of the SEC through that former Georgia defensive back Devod Wilson is on his way to UCF. Kind of a cool, first of all, good job by Michael Carvel putting this on the screen. Kind of a cool Joker type meme there when it comes to Wilson, but he's on his way to UCF. He'll play for the Golden Knights in the American Athletic Conference. And then recruiting news, Leonard Taylor, the 5-star defensive lineman we've talked about before, as expected, has chosen Miami over Florida. This is obviously interesting for a couple of reasons. It's another major recruiting setback for Dan Mullen, who just can't buy a recruiting win worth speaking about. Taylor going to Miami is not unexpected, but it is still a reminder of just how flaccid Mullen's recruiting attempts have been, for the most part, inside the Sunshine State over the course of the last couple of cycles. And I guess conversely, and you're already seeing some of this on the internet, I guess you got to give more than a little bit of credit. You got to give a lot of credit. Manny Diaz, the Miami head coach, has really done a pretty good job locking down the 305 for the most part. James Williams is an example of that. Leonard Taylor becomes an example of that there as well. Diaz has done a pretty good job here. Now, one of the things we've seen, even going back to the time when like Mark Richt was the coach at Miami, you see a lot of decommits from the Hurricanes for the most part. So I'm going to wait and hold off on truly crowning Diaz as a great recruiter until we see how the 2021 cycle finishes off there, because even in a normal year, Miami kind of has a lot of decommitments. But if Diaz does hold on to a lot of these guys, then I think you can say that the recruiting landscape in the Sunshine State for the most part has changed. Remember when James Williams first gave his top 3? No Florida teams were included in that. It was kind of a signal of what things have been like as of late, which is for the most part teams outside of the state of Florida coming into the state of Florida and getting whatever recruits they want, Miami included. Georgia's done that to great success. Maybe under Manny Diaz now, that's going to be a little more difficult to do. That's a story worth watching, because obviously the best possible roster you can build is always going to include some guys from South Florida. But maybe getting more difficult to do with Diaz with the Hurricanes for right now will make that your SEC through. And real quickly here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, let me give a shout out to my friends at Kroger. Of course, they're calling on all teachers right now because they've got something special for you. This is Wednesday, so mark this down for this upcoming week. Wednesday, you get a chance to save an extra 10% on school supplies, toys, electronics, all kinds of stuff for you, apparel there as well. So want to take good care of teachers, want to do right by the teachers. Kroger's doing that on Wednesdays. Big savings, 10%, school supplies, toys, electronics, apparel, and more. Make sure you check that out at your local Kroger. Okay, so there is something on DawgNation Daily that I've been wanting to get to all week, and let me just do this here on a Friday. I may also expand some of these thoughts on a DN90 later on today there as well, but Pro Football Network, which is one of these websites that covers the NFL draft, recently gave a pretty big compliment to Georgia defensive lineman Jordan Davis. And it's a part of a thought process I've kind of had about Davis there as well. If you're watching a video, you see him on your screen. This is obviously a big guy, but for those of you who are watching on video, notice how, there's nothing about the weight that Davis had in the past that's not proportional, right? I mean, this is not some guy that's just a space eater. This is a guy who seems to be pretty comfortable in his own feet. He carries his size well, and he uses it well. Davis had 2.5 sacks for Georgia a year ago. This is more than just a space clogger as a run-stopping defensive lineman. In fact, the folks at Pro Football Network have taken that a step further, calling him the sleeper for the upcoming NFL draft. Matthew Valdovinos is the writer here. Listen to what he says. That Davis was a wrecking ball on the Georgia defensive line. His natural play strength is some of the best in the nation. He possesses more pass rush upside than he's displayed. That's a very important sentence. And he's at worst an elite run defender with, he says, 5 to 6 sack upside in the NFL. Now, in the SEC, being a run-stopping defensive lineman is always going to matter. This is still a league that runs the football, and when more teams than ever before are kind of using nickel defense as their base defense, having limited personnel on the field and still stopping the run, something that Monty Rice helps Georgia do, something that Davis helps Georgia do, that's going to continue to be pretty important. However, when you go back and think about Davis as a recruit, he was only a 3-star, and the conventional wisdom at the time was, well, when you're a run-stopping defensive lineman, you don't get a ton of stats, and therefore it's hard for the recruiting industry to evaluate you properly. But I do think there is a degree to which what Valdivino says about Davis that's becoming true. This is more than just a guy whose number one skill is just being big. That Davis does seem to have some footwork. As I said before, 2.5 sacks is not a small number. It was tied for second on the Georgia team a year ago, and the potential to do more. I'm not telling you he's a Derek Brown. I'm not telling you he's a Javon Kinlaw. But he may, from a player profile standpoint, have more in common with guys like that this year than his recruiting profile coming out of high school would have suggested. This could be a guy that NFL teams like, not just because he's a run stopper, because for the most part in the NFL draft, that's not a very valuable commodity. That he could be a much bigger interior pass rush threat. Future for the NFL, maybe, but at Georgia in the present tense for this upcoming season, which obviously for a Georgia team who wants to be great on defense, wants to be the best in the country, you need pass rush to be able to do that. Jordan Davis might be able to provide that. Pretty interesting. By the way, Cole Kubelik, and I know Mike Griffith wrote about this at DawgNation.com this week. When he put out his top list of interior defensive linemen, he had Davis second on that list behind just Tyler Shelvin from LSU, ahead of guys like Christian Barmore from Alabama and Quentin Bahana from Kentucky, Glenn Logan also from LSU there as well. It's sacking the quarterback as an interior pass rusher that makes you truly the best in this league, and Davis may be doing more of that this year than some people give him credit for. Let me also do this kind of as a shout-out on the way out the door here. Someone sent this to me. This is really cool. If you're on video, you can see this. Look at this Gator Hater big-time. This is like a sort of oversized, for those of you radio podcast, license plate, our Gator Hater logo here. Someone's made that for me. His name's Rob. It's Alpha Graphics in Swanee. So if you go to this website, alphagraphics.com, you can find out more about this. It's the Swanee location, though, that Rob is at. So there are more than one Alpha Graphics, but check out the Swanee location for Rob. He does a lot of this kind of stuff. The Gator Hater thing here is really, really cool. This will be hung in a position of prominence, I can promise you, here in our DawgNation World Headquarters studio. So thank you very much to Rob, Alpha Graphics there in Swanee, for doing a great job on this here today. It looks great standing next to Eddie here there as well. By the way, speaking of Gator Hater Updater, 1,378 days. You love to see that. That number's going to keep climbing. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We'll take your comments. We're going to be kind of quick today. We've been going a little bit long on these, what is it they talk about in the military? Mission creep. We've had a little bit of a mission creep as of late when it comes to our comment section or R.S. Andrews Cool Down. So we're going to try to keep the train on the tracks for that today. But make sure you check out R.S. Andrews for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Right now, you probably don't have a lot of heating needs. You're probably not that worried about your furnace. But your air conditioning unit, you better believe you're paying attention to that. If you're worried that, because listen, we got a bunch of August left, and September is going to be even hotter as a month. So if you're worried about your system not making it all the way through, well, get yours tuned back up to factory fresh specs. What are you waiting on? Go to rsanders.com. Tell Dari and the whole team we said hello over there, and they will take really good care of you. All right, over here on Facebook for a moment, your comments, and then we'll go over to YouTube after that. Randy Hall says Brock Bowers this week. I guess. You heard Jeff Sintel talking about that a moment ago. Your guess is as good as mine as to when all that might play itself out. Oh, no. Kyle Fold sounds like he had a rough day. Kyle, first of all, thanks for being someone that springs into action to help others. My goodness. David Johnston, good to speak to you. Thanks for being here. Daniel Aldrich says, so ready for the weekend. Yeah, you and me both, Daniel. I don't know, for some reason, I'm just like you. I'm just ready for a weekend. I don't even have huge weekend plans, but I'm just kind of ready for one. Shelton Tucker says, where's the schedule? Boy, that's a good question, Shelton. We talked about that off the top of the program. It started off kind of being a joke. Florida, some of these SEC schools complaining about their schedule. The longer it goes without being announced, all of a sudden it starts to feel a little less funny. It starts to feel like the kind of thing where people like me start to wonder, hey, wait a second, what really is going on here? Why is this taking so long? Philip Jordan Will says BA said he got to get home today. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm not in a great mood or something. I can't even really speak to it beyond that much. Mark McDowell says the ACC is playing an 11-game season. I was actually pretty surprised by that, Mark. I thought once the SEC went 10, they wouldn't schedule the non-conference games, but apparently they still want to. I mean, for someone like Tech, you may say that, hey, playing UCF in your stadium is something worth doing. I think UCF was ranked in the Coaches Bowl, right? So they may feel like that's a game worth playing, but most of these ACC teams are going to be stuck playing like, I don't know, a lot of Liberty, probably some UT Chattanooga, got a lot of that kind of stuff. Randy Hall says that he saw that Notori Johnson's playing offensive tackle this year. That's what Solomon Kinley said when he joined us for one of our broadcasts earlier in the spring. I would say there's probably still a chance he maybe plays on either side of the ball. First of all, I love Notori. You know, Notori's a little bit like Nate McBride or Tommy Bush, one of these guys who just gets asked about in the comment section all the time, and I think it's with good reason. You know, Notori, I just think there's a lot of this in the Georgia roster right now because of how deep it is. You know, Notori, I think, really believed that he was in line for some early playing time at Georgia. I think he maybe had a little bit of a setback right at the beginning of his college career that maybe, as setbacks tend to do, set him back. And, you know, things have kind of worked out the way they have. Man, but Notori has gotten himself in great shape. Not that he wasn't in good shape before, but saw some, you know, footage of him from a year ago. He was really, really, I think, in pretty good physical condition, willing to play defensive line when Georgia needed that, shifted back to offensive line for the Sugar Bowl. This is a guy that seems to be playing a lot without very much ego. Just a guy out there working hard, trying to do what he can do. I like Notori, man. I really do. There's a lot of guys in this Georgia roster like that, where it's like, you know, people like me are always hyping up the very best recruits, the very biggest names. But if you want to see the most inspiring Georgia stories, it's really the guys who are a little farther down the depth chart. If you really want to feel good about the work being done by some of the guys in this Georgia roster, I think some of the guys you have to look at the most are the guys that are not playing, or at least as much as they want to be playing. And Tori's an example of that. So either side of the ball, I would say, is probably still an option for him if I had to guess. Lucy Bowers-Boykin said, what do the playoffs look like? In conference playoffs, only playoffs between winners of each conference. So as it stands right now, the expectation is it's still going to be a 4-team playoff, just maybe a little bit more difficult to decipher what's going on because of the absence of the non-conference games. I think that, you know, I think they'd be open to the expansion, but there's so much, I mean, as gross as this sounds to say, if they expanded the playoff, it would not be for competitive reasons, it'd be financial reasons, and that's a long cycle of negotiation. So I think you should probably expect it to remain a 4-team playoff. And I'm telling you right now, for those of us who believe the SEC is undoubtedly, inarguably the best conference in college football, you better buckle your seatbelt for some pretty annoying arguments this upcoming fall. I'm preparing myself for it already. Daniel Aldridge says tax-free weekend in Florida, getting ready for school to get going. Yay. Do we still have tax-free weekends in Georgia? I know we used to. Does that still go on? I bet my wife knows, but I don't know. Shelton Tucker says, so are we adding Arkansas and Ole Miss? I don't think anybody knows as of yet. I don't think so. Mike Griffith said on Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau yesterday, he thought that Texas A&M would be one of Georgia's 2 opponents. I still don't quite understand why, but I guess anything's possible, I guess. Matt Rucavino on the subject of the ACC fans saying the SEC ducked them. Yeah, you know, if you follow politics, one of the most frustrating things sometimes can be the notion of what's called a process story, as opposed to dealing with the facts of a situation, actually how it impacts real people's lives. It's like backdoor, behind-the-scenes politics. Now, admittedly, I like the soap opera of stuff like that, but for the most part, people get turned off by process stories because they're just the kind of thing for the media to fixate on more than anything else. And, you know, the who canceled what game and who's to blame for one of the ACC-SEC rivalries aren't taking place, that to me kind of goes into the category of a process story, and I think the average fan, at least on the SEC side, doesn't have much reason to even worry about that. Clarence Dawson says, will the schedule come out today? I don't know. I guess it could. I've been waiting for it I've been waiting for it now for a few days, so I guess it could come out. And I think there's a chance that what they do is, and this is one of those things that admittedly as a respected member of the Coastal Elite broadcast media is good for me, not good for you, is that they will probably give you the 2 opponents, but not give you the dates of the games. That means we have to hype another announcement coming up in a few days, which all y'all want to know is just what's the schedule, when the game is going to get played. For those of us in the content business, we like the little trickle of information that keeps coming out. Admittedly, that's how we put food on our table. So if I had to say that the next announcement may be the 2 opponents minus the dates, maybe. I'm not quite so sure about that. But yeah, I mean, I guess it could come today. But typically, typically these kinds of things are reserved for bad news. So would the SEC use the cover of what you think of as like a Friday news dump to announce this? That seems kind of weird, unless they really have kind of weaseled out on giving Florida a tougher game and they want to, I guess, minimize that. But, I mean, the Big Ten essentially did the same thing with their ranked team, so I guess it's not all that different. Mark Brantley on YouTube says the improved pass rushes around Jordan Davis this season, Walker, Carter, healthy Rochester, should give Davis some easier snaps. Teams really tend to focus on stopping Davis. That's true. And, I think I work with Chuck Smith, right? And, Chuck, the former Falcon, former Tennessee Vol, is obviously everybody's got a thing that they're really into and they devote their life to learning as much about it as they possibly can. For some people, it's woodworking. For Chuck Smith, it's pass rushing. And, Chuck is just a big believer in the value of that interior pass rush. Ultimately, I would say spending as much time as I spent around Chuck, because he and I did the Falcon show together last year, that probably altered my line of thought on this, where, when I thought about what, like I say, Javon Kinlaw did for South Carolina, I was thinking about, how tough it is to run the football with Kinlaw there in the middle. But, Chuck would gravitate towards that interior pass rush, and you see the way in which NFL teams value these players. They expect those guys in the interior of the line to still get after quarterbacks. And the way in which Georgia gets to a big sack number, I've said before, a dream scenario for me would be about 40 for Georgia. That's in a 12-game season. Do you recalibrate that on a 10-game schedule? You probably do a little bit, but let's just speak off 12-game numbers for a moment. The way you get to like a 40 number is not Nolan Smith having 15, although, he's probably got that kind of potential, but it's not some superstar player necessarily having a superstar type performance. It's, Azeez Ojulari going from 5.5 to 9.5. 9.5 is what Clavon Chasen had for LSU a year ago. It's, finding a way to get, a guy that had 2.5 to get to that sort of 5-6 number. It's just finding a way for all the guys for Georgia that contributed sacks. As I said before, Davis had 2.5, Nolan had 2.5, Jermaine Johnson had 2.5, Azeez had 5.5. All of a sudden, you find a couple more for each of those guys, and you've completely changed the nature of your pass rush. And I agree with you that the presence of better pass rush coming off the edge makes the interior very difficult to deal with there as well. Noah Sheldon, thanks for the kind word. So this Georgia shirt here came from the UGA bookstore. I love the UGA bookstore. One of the things I like about them is they have a bunch of different kinds of brands. This is, I think, a Cutter and Buck. UGA bookstore. We're going to be back there again for the UGA for our DawgNation post game show again this fall, and they've got some really good stuff. So Noah, I'm glad that you noticed that. I really appreciate that. Christopher Rules checking in from San Diego, California. Christopher, good to have you as part of the program. Jay Shipe says, can we stop with the A&M hype at least until Jimbo beats a ranked team? Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it doesn't happen, can we just agree on this, Jay? If it doesn't happen this year, then I'm going to back off of it, because it would seem to be the kind of year in which Jimbo ought to get some big win. Maybe you take a loss here and there just on the basis of the SEC West schedule, but there ought to be some chances for some big wins. I believe they will come for Jimbo. I believe he's a good coach. If it doesn't happen this year, then I'll step off of it. But let's watch and see how it plays out this season. G Grace. Come on, G. Come on, G. Bama boy weighing in with some funny stuff on Facebook. Randy Hall, thank you very much for the kind words. All right, I said we're going to get off early, and we're not. So let me just try to get this wrapped up here in a moment. So Shelton Tucker says, who are the SEC teams that Georgia's currently playing? So it's the SEC East full schedule plus Auburn and Alabama right now. On the basis of the tough SEC West games, is Georgia owed to easier SEC West opponents to kind of round out the 10-game schedule? Maybe so. I wonder about that. Walter MacArthur says, as a fan base, we have to stop, and we'll make this the last comment today. We have to stop worrying about who doesn't come to Georgia and appreciate the ones that we do have. All the 5 and 4 stars don't pan out. Look at the top 5 in the NFL top 100, all 3 stars. That's kind of interesting. So I still think recruiting is really important, and collecting as many 4 and 5 star players as you can is a huge part of the success formula in college football. However, the one thing I will agree with the commenter on is, I've said this, is that for me right now, maximizing the talent that Georgia currently has is more important than the next generation of 2021 or 2022 prospects at the moment. Because if you don't start, really putting a bunch of guys in the front end of the NFL draft, the recruiting momentum is going to slow down anyway. So this is a year in which Georgia, with a weird cycle where visits aren't currently taking place, the best commercial for UGA recruiting is to see a huge jump in production from Nolan Smith. We just spent a bunch of time talking about Jordan Davis, seeing him going out and having a big-time year where he gets even better than he's been before. If you do that kind of stuff, I can promise you plenty of recruits are going to want to come play at Georgia. And that's a responsibility the Dogs have right now. All right, a very fun conversation here today. We appreciate all of you being a part of it, and we appreciate the AJC for keeping us up to date on everything happening in our state. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. One of the things that you may have seen some are these photos that have popped up from some of the school restarts in, say, Cherokee, Paulding County, of maybe some high schools where the hallways seem just a little bit too crowded. That's been controversial. The AJC's got coverage of that online at ajc.com. Also, drive-in movies, getting a chance to be outdoors and seeing some movies in a socially distanced way. Some of that kind of stuff's going on around the metro Atlanta area. You can find out more about that. And, for those of us who are doing some video teleconferencing at home, I am obviously for broadcasts, like our Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau, sometimes meetings that are important. I got young kids there as well, a lot of that going on. There are ways to soundproof your office, and the AJC's got some really good coverage of that at the moment there as well. So ajc.com, get your Atlanta news now. Stay up to date on everything happening in your local world and around the world online at ajc.com. Also, big thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cooldown possible. Water heater goes out. In many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. Just find them online. Dari and the whole team over there online at rsandrews.com. You have a great weekend. Happy Friday. It's DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. I'll see you back here Monday at 10.